A renewed effort to find a solution to the epidemic of suspended driver's licenses in Kansas. Plus, property taxes, income taxes, who should pay what? Takes center stage in Topeka. And education savings accounts, tax credits, and other funding ideas. Are they about giving families more choice or destroying the state's public school system? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week.
Southwest National Bank has proudly served Wichita and its surrounding communities for over 100 years. We are happy to support PBS Kansas Public Television.
I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. This week, schools were a hot topic at the State House as the Kansas Senate approved a bill that would create what's called an education savings account program for at-risk students. It's a proposal opponents say would gut the Kansas public school system without guaranteeing help to those who need it most, as Rebecca Chung from the KSN Capitol Bureau shows us.
Lawmakers held a hearing on the bill. No final action is being taken yet, but public school advocates are concerned what this could mean for struggling students if it does pass. The bill would use tax dollars to subsidize private and home schools, many of which don't have to meet the same standards as public schools to operate in-person classes. Essentially, if a child qualifies for the program, parents are able to withdraw them from public or charter schools and receive a deposit of public funds into a government-authorized account. They could use this money to pay for private school tuition and fees, online learning programs, or other educational services their child needs.
For most people, it doesn't matter what kind of place they go, it's just that they are learning. It's about helping kids, all kids. We need all hands on deck.
A modest income student from a large family could qualify even if they're doing fine in school right now. And a truly struggling child in poverty, there's absolutely no guarantee that that child could take advantage of this.
Critics say the wide range of eligibility is one of the key issues with the bill, which doesn't guarantee that students who are severely at risk will get the help they need. Right now, 5 states have education savings account programs, Arizona being the first to enact it in 2011 to help at-risk students. At the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
Now, this is just one of several education funding bills under debate at the State House this week. Here to help dig through all of this, I'm joined on the set by Dr. Russell Arbin Fox, a political scientist from Friends University. And on Zoom, we have Dr. Michael Smith, a political scientist from Emporia State University. Welcome to both of you. And Michael, I'm going to start with you. As I mentioned, this was one of several school funding ideas that were debated at the State House this week. The Senate passed a form of a voucher bill at one point. A lot of these ideas we've heard before. They're not necessarily new, but maybe they have a better chance this year with a more conservative legislature.
That's right. And we're already seeing a number of changes in the Kansas Senate, things that caused gridlock last year are now moving quickly, and in particular, it's the more conservative stance. And also the anti-abortion constitutional amendment. So conservatives in Kansas are charged up and they're ready to go, and vouchers and homeschooling have been part of their agenda for years.
And I know we've talked about this before, Russell, with some of the various school funding options out of there. A lot of these coming from a conservative think tank that provides bills called ALEC.
Right. So you have ALEC and actually other organizations similar to that some time ago realized that one of the essential ways to move forward on their goals was not necessarily to fight to capture the national legislature, Congress, though of course they still work at that, but to capture state legislatures. And the fact that a lot of people don't pay as much attention as they should to what's going on in their state capitals means that a lot of them have been able to advance their arguments quite a ways down the road. You look at something like this, and especially in the context of the pandemic and so many people making use of online educational resources, there's a different sort of argument than what you've had before. But fundamentally, the issue remains the same. We have, under the Kansas Constitution, a guarantee that an equitable education will be offered to all. You create a system that's going to allow people to use vouchers or a savings account in particular ways, and you're really opening up the possibility that certain people are going to be able to provide a lot more educational opportunities to their children with public money than other people would be able to. And so they're going to have to look very closely at these.
Although I can see the argument that they are still providing equitable funding for every student.
But of course, we have procedures in place to assess whether or not the public schools are offering that equitable education. When you see that expanded to include all sorts of private options or online options, those procedures for assessment become way more complicated. I'm not saying they'd be impossible, but the thing is that the conservatives pushing these ideas, they're not especially concerned about, crossing all the T's and dotting on the I's on that issue. Their main goal is to break the monopoly of the public schools. I mean, that's been a stated goal for a long time. And this potentially could help out a lot of families, but it also could potentially do that kind of damage to the public school system.
And Michael, I'm going to come back to you on this one, but as we look at this issue, there's a lot of question of how many students and which students would be able to take advantage of a program like this. The voucher system that passed the Senate, supporters were estimating maybe 2,000 Kansas kids, and opponents saying probably more like 200,000, and that really would change the funding equation of what would be left for kids who couldn't take advantage of the new programs.
That's so true. There are a couple of issues here. One is, as you just pointed out, Pilar, that we don't know what numbers we're working with here. They vary wildly. The number of people taking advantage of it in other states has been rather on the low side in terms of what it could have been, nowhere near 200,000. And that could limit the impact somewhat. But there's another issue here, which is, what about families who already send their children to private schools? Even if they make no change, won't they automatically become eligible for the vouchers? And how much is that going to cost?
Oh, that's definitely a good question. And of course, paying for all of this, one of the things the state would have to figure out, which is why income taxes were also under debate this week, with the Senate passing a massive tax cut bill and the governor offering an alternative. Let's look at the Senate bill first. It started out as a $175 million tax reform bill, but after several hours of debate on the Senate floor, it ballooned into a $450 to $470 million package. $215 million of that due to a state income tax exemption on retirement benefits starting July 1st, as well as $75 to $80 million for expanding the standard deduction on state income taxes. Now, Senator Jeff Longbine of Emporia was one of a handful of Republicans who voted against the final bill, saying it felt too much like the 2012 tax cuts that sent the state into a recession. The governor has another idea for what to do with your taxes, as KSN's Crystal Sherrill shows us.
A local economist, Jeremy Hill, breaks down the tax plan for me and says this could mean a more direct cash flow to those hit hardest during the pandemic, the middle and lower class citizens of Kansas. Now, Hill says this proposal is a great way to get revenue back to the state and directly to those who need it most. He says while this is much different from a stimulus check format, it would help small businesses and help prevent bankruptcies on both the household and business side. The additional revenue would come at the cost of remote sellers like Amazon, Etsy, and streaming services, but Hill says it is a good plan.
It's really a no-brainer. I don't think that has any economic cost, really. It's not going to slow our businesses. It actually makes businesses here more competitive, where we're losing some competitive edge when people can go online and not pay a tax.
Now, Hill did remind me that although this is a great plan for most Kansans, there are going to be some downsides to any tax change. Crystal Sherrill, KSN News 3.
Now, given the changes that we have seen in the makeup of the legislature this year, is it really any surprise that we're seeing a lot of similar tax cut proposals from lawmakers this year that we saw back in 2012?
No, it's not a surprise. I mean, I suppose it's a surprise to some people. There were quite a few observers of Kansas politics who took a look at the midterm elections in 2016, and they took a look at Governor Kelly's election in 2018, and they said, well, the brownback Republican revolution has come to an end. And then there were others of us, I was one of them, who thought, well, I'm not sure we can be certain of that. And then, of course, you take a look at the strong Republican turnout, we take a look at the conservative gains that came in 2020, we take a look at these proposals, and incidentally, 420 to 470 million is just one estimate. There are others who are talking about this actually involving a $600 million tax cut. Yeah, I mean, the brownback ideal of shrinking government, whatever the cost, is still very much alive and well amongst some parts of the Kansas Republican Party.
Wow. Well, and as we look at those proposed tax cuts, you know, I've talked with senators who have said they like the ideas, but they're not sure how we're going to pay for all of it.
Mm-hmm. The basic philosophical difference that you see kicking around between the Republican and Democratic Party in Kansas, and actually between different factions within the Republican Party in Kansas, has never been fully settled. You take a look at Governor Kelly's tax plan. It's not going to involve any increase in taxes. It's going to be revenue neutral, but the main focus is let's figure out ways to secure revenue to the state in order to fund basic programs. So let's talk about the fact that internet sales in Kansas are not taxed, that out-of-state businesses operating in Kansas pay no sales tax. Those are the sorts of things they want to look at because they're concerned about revenue. If you're one of the people that are kind of on the brownback remnant of the Kansas Republican Party, you're not actually that interested in revenue because you actually want the state to do less. You want to see cuts in terms of education and law enforcement and healthcare and prisons and so forth. That's not something that's going to be resolved when you have a Democratic governor and then you have a strong conservative Republican contingent in both houses of the legislature.
Wow. Well, and I know the internet sales tax issue, when I started covering the State House in 2013, I had senators in particular coming up to me and saying, we need to start taxing sales on internet sales out of Kansas. Is its time finally here, Michael?
It could be. It's certainly, well, you heard the governor's argument, and she wants to extend it to services as well as merchandise sold online. But again, the argument is, why are we taxing small businesses in Kansas that are brick and mortar retailers creating Kansas jobs and giving a pass to out-of-state companies that only have some of their operations? And it doesn't seem fair. And the argument is also, as you heard in the story, a way to put back revenue, for example, that's lost if there are some abatements for hard-hit companies with the property tax or what have you. You can put back the revenue with that. Now, what the Kansas Senate has done has been more of a brownback style approach. Just go full steam ahead and to heck with the budget. And so they're not looking at that more nuanced approach. But you're right. The argument for internet sales is not about new taxes. It's about fairness.
Well, and no, go ahead.
I believe Kansas is one of only, I think, 5 states that doesn't have some sort of policy in place to make sales tax burdens equitable on out-of-state and internet businesses. I mean, we're kind of in the minority here in refusing to look seriously at this revenue source.
And talking about the services and the streaming that Michael brought up, that's been, I've actually done a couple of stories on this. It's really a point of confusion because some streaming services like Disney Plus go ahead and charge the sales tax for Kansas because they consider themselves to fall under cable, which is required under Kansas law. Others like Netflix and Hulu that started as just streaming services, they don't tax. And so people say, why am I getting taxed here and not there? And last year even I had lawmakers telling me that they were hearing from constituents. It was very confusing. They wanted to get it cleared up. So might be something we see happen
That's an important confusion.
Yep. Well, up next, it's a problem Cake News Investigates has been tracking for 2 years. Some even call it an epidemic. More than 134,000 Kansans have suspended driver's licenses, and state lawmakers say that costs Kansas and you money. So once again, they're trying to do something about it.
Parking tickets can make you lose your license.
I had to move back in with my parents.
We've heard from hundreds of you about the spiral into debt that can follow a simple traffic stop, unpaid parking ticket, or late insurance payment.
As we've all seen over the news all across the state of Kansas, this issue is affecting so many people.
Senator Aletha Faust-Goudeau of Wichita brought the issue back before state lawmakers Thursday after the pandemic shut down efforts to make changes last year. One of the main parts of the changes proposed this year would impact the fee Kansans pay to get their license back. Right now, state law says you have to pay $100 for every charge leading to a suspension. There's an average of 4 charges for every Kansan with a suspended license, leading to an additional $400 cost to drive again after they've already paid off all their fines and fees from the tickets. This bill would mean you only pay that reinstatement fee once. Even law enforcement associations concerned about holding drivers accountable for things like DUIs support that change.
We want to hold people accountable, but we don't want to create these hardships.
Which is why the lawmakers in this room expect that they will get at least some changes across the finish line into the governor's desk this year.
Everybody's at the table now. That's good. It's good for those thousands of Kansans who are affected.
I think the legislature sees a need that we need to address this somehow. There's still work on this bill, and there's some amendments being proposed, but I think today was a good start.
Lawmakers expect they may be ready to move this bill to the next step as early as next week. And Michael, I think one of the most telling moments about how concerted the mood is that they're going to make some changes this year, a gentleman from the Judiciary branch who was testifying did not specifically testify against the bill, which they have done previously with some of these changes, but simply warned lawmakers that this would cost courts money that they use to pay employees that would have to be paid back from the state in some other way.
It could, but it kind of reminds me, pardon me for the interruption, it kind of reminds me of the argument for sales tax holidays. And the argument is, would you rather have $100 in your pocket, or theoretically you're owed $400, but you're never going to see it because they can't afford it? And then there's a second piece of that is that while cars are very deadly and we hate to see reckless driving, having access to a car is necessary for a lot of jobs and functioning in society. There's also another issue, which is if people are going to drive anyway, do you want unlicensed drivers with no insurance or licensed drivers with insurance? So it's very complicated.
Yeah. And that last point is why lawmakers say that fixing this issue really would save all Kansans money.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no downside to addressing the burden that is placed disproportionately on poor people through these kinds of funds, which, as Michael points out, half the time are never even really collected. They just, exist out there, and people drive secretly, or they fall deeper into poverty because they're not able to legally drive their cars. I'm glad to see that you have both Democrats and Republicans saying that this is going to go forward. I just hope that what comes out in the end is something that will really address the problem fully.
Yeah, and you kind of did mention one issue, the poverty angle of this. Some folks, Michael, call the legislation like this a poverty tax.
And it makes sense. It's easy to get into a spiral. We wish people wouldn't drive recklessly, of course, but so often these fees and fines and everything else can create a spiral that it's really hard to get out of. And, with one of our core values as a society being everyone who is able needs to work and provide for themselves, they're going to need to be able to pay their bills, and they're going to probably need to have access to an automobile to do that.
Yeah. Well, and it does look like this bill will be moving on perhaps next week. So we're going to move on to our next topic. Some lawmakers want to pay back small businesses hurt by the pandemic shutdowns this year in a new property tax bill. A proposal talked about in the Kansas House Taxation Committee this week would give property tax dollars back to businesses that were shut down because of coronavirus restrictions. It would focus on counties that have shut down businesses or just limited the capacity in them during the pandemic. It would reimburse property taxes that a business paid during the time it was forced to close. For companies that had limited hours or were limited to only having a certain number of people in them, they could get a reduced amount back. A Sedgwick County commissioner made the trip to Topeka to speak against the proposal. Pete Meitzner told lawmakers this, as presented originally, was going to have some extreme financial impact on not only our Sedgwick County, but budgets all around the state. We would just have to take it and just start cutting all across our $180 million, $190 million budgets. Certainly not something that most counties can really afford to do right now, is start cutting their budgets.
No, I mean, you've got all sorts of increased demands upon local government, both on the city and the county level. Look, the business owners have a legitimate concern, both on the level of, a constitutional issue. Is there a sense in which being ordered to shut down your business is kind of a taking of their income? And also just simply from a welfare perspective. There are ways in which business owners really do need to be compensated. But that's why we need to be thinking, for instance, about, the federal proposed authorization of hundreds of billions of dollars to states and municipalities across the country to help fund programs that will take care of these problems that business owners are facing. For the business owners to, say it's got to come out of the county's pocket, well, I mean, that's kind of a crazy unfunded mandate that's going to create all sorts of perverse incentives. It's going to create an incentive for counties to not enforce state health laws in order to make sure that they don't get dinged later with, business tax refunds.
And certainly by no means have I done an exhaustive polling of the state legislature, but the lawmakers I've spoken with about this bill have said that they really don't see it going anywhere. Michael, is this kind of part of just the overall conversation that has to be going on at the State House about what we do to help the state recover from what's happened over the last year?
It may very well be, yes. One of the frustrating things with the relief we've seen at the federal level is that on the one hand, it works best if it comes out immediately. The sooner the better, get those checks out. But the flip side is it's not very precisely targeted. I mean, we've got people who have not lost their jobs and who have done fairly well in the stock market getting relief checks. And we wish we could really target those that, like those businesses like restaurants and bars that have absolutely been devastated. But that takes longer, and we need to get the relief out ASAP. So it's just a conundrum. But Russell's right about the fact that counties do a lot of public health work, particularly for people without insurance. And then the other piece of that is the biggest chunk of your property tax go to fund the schools. This could blow a hole in the school-based funding formula and reopen more problems with the state budget.
That's an angle I hadn't even considered.
Right. Going along with what Michael said about how it's certainly to the advantage of the people to get the money out to them immediately. One thing that I wonder if anybody is looking at this is in the same way that you've seen moratoriums on rent collection, couldn't there be moratoriums on the property tax bill that are faced by certain businesses, certainly not all businesses, but the businesses like restaurants and bars that have been most harmed by the necessary closure for the sake of public health? I mean, I would hope that somebody is taking a look at that, because that would be a way to enable them to hold on to the money that they have for immediate purposes. Wow. But it's just one of, as you say, several things that are going to have to be talked about as we address how to get the state going again.
Yeah. Well, finally today, a Wichita couple is asking the city to create a no-chase zone downtown after a police chase totaled their car. Kix Jackson Overstreet explains.
Sunday, January 24th will be a day that Robbie Grant always remembers. He was driving downtown, headed to the gym.
Light turned green and I'm passing through, and all of a sudden I get hit.
The crash was the end result of a police chase that had started down the street. Police tell us an officer attempted a traffic stop of a stolen vehicle at Topeka and William. The suspect took off down the road where they hit Grant.
I get out of my truck and I'm looking, and they're running out of their cars with their guns drawn. Not on me. They didn't even pay attention to me, to be honest.
The crash totaled Grant's car and now causes some anxiety whenever he gets on the road. He and his wife Kelly are using this experience to push for changes in how Wichita police conduct pursuits, specifically downtown. They have suggested to make the area between Central and Pawnee to the north and south And then Oliver and Seneca to the east and west, a no chase zone.
It doesn't make sense to risk the public in the name of protecting the public.
The Grants have spoken with police and city council member Cindy Claycomb privately, as well as addressed the full council on Tuesday to start a dialogue for change.
My first outcome is just to understand what both sides are and then see where we want to go from there.
Hopefully preventing anyone else from dealing with what they have gone through.
I want to save other people the emotional pain that I had to go through and my wife had to go through and my kids have to go through.
In downtown Wichita, Jackson Overstreet, Cake News on your side.
And this accident comes after a similar, much more deadly accident May of 2019 when two people were killed there. Really kind of very emotional issue. The question is it realistic?
I think it actually is realistic because there's a way in which this kind of proposal could fold into other only tangentially related proposals, but all of which are focused on trying to make the downtown more pedestrian friendly, trying to make it less car centric. Obviously, there's a lot of different factors that are involved there, and so far as this issue goes, I haven't made a study of police chase procedures amongst the Wichita Police Department, but I know that there are people that are looking at this closely, and to the extent that this effort builds on those efforts, then I think it could contribute long-term to some real thinking about our downtown.
Yeah. And you mentioned looking at it seriously, Michael. A lot of police departments across the country really reassessing a lot of their different policies over this last year. This may be just being another one in that entire pile.
Well, that's what I was thinking too, that we're really having a national conversation. It's unfortunately a very divided and not a very deliberative one, but we're having a national conversation about policing, and this fits right in. Automobiles are more than just transportation, right? They can be used as weapons. We've seen them used as murder weapons against demonstrators, and a lot of police cars are fitted with what's basically a battering ram on the front. And when that slams into another car, there are going to be a lot of damage. It is part of a bigger discussion about how police go about doing their jobs, and they have the tools that they need, but at the same time, we protect the public.
All right. Very quickly, we're almost out of time.
Don't forget about the incident out in Kiowa of the unarmed man that was run down by the police officer.
Yeah.
They just thought that's the most effective way to stop him.
Yep. Yeah, some very big questions there. Well, thank you, Russell, Michael, both so much for joining me today. I hope you and the audience have enjoyed our discussion as well. I'd also like to thank Cake News, KSN News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue the conversation with you on social media. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or PBS Kansas on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. For now, stay safe and have a great week.
Southwest National Bank has proudly served Wichita and its surrounding communities for over 100 years. We are happy to support PBS Kansas Public Television.